Welcome back to Caps Hockey Review. Back with you after two more games to discuss, both on the road in Buffalo and in Chicago. More lineup changes for the Caps. It just keeps on rolling. We're going to break it all down. It's Caps Hockey Review. Here we go. And off we go. What's up, everybody? It is Caps Hockey Review, back at it again. For the Caps, 2 games on the road, heading into a third in Winnipeg. The travel arrangements are all up in the air. I'll get to that at the end. But for Washington, starting off this road trip in Buffalo. For these guys, it's the second half of a back-to-back. You came off a loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins the night before. You have to travel to Buffalo. It makes for a tough game, and it looked like a tough game for these guys. It's, the second half of a back-to-back is never easy, but they found a way to win a hockey game. They get another one in a shootout, so the overtime woes look to be maybe correcting themselves a little bit. It's been historically the Caps always hover in that 500 territory in overtime, maybe a little bit better even. So it's been uncharacteristic for them in overtime this season, but maybe getting the ship righted a little bit with another shootout win. Daniel Sprong is really lights out in the shootout this season. TJ Oshie hadn't scored in a couple in a row, gets back on the right track. We all know how dangerous he is in the shootout. For the Caps in this game, it's your typical second half of a back-to-back. If you are, they are a little bit of an older team at this point in their, I don't know what you want to say, in their lifespan, whatever we want to say here. But for the Caps, and that might be why overtime's getting harder, but I'll circle back a little bit. For the Caps, this second half of a back-to-back, especially coming off a loss against Pittsburgh. You're trying to get the game tied late. They had an opportunity. They couldn't get there. But you're double shifting your best players at that point. So Kuz, Ovi, Carlson, Wilson, everybody's playing extra. Orlov's probably out there quite a bit as well. So for the Caps, it doesn't set up an ideal situation. You got to hit the road for the second half. You're coming into Buffalo. Buffalo, like we've talked about, it should be a winnable game if you're the Caps. But it's the second half of back-to-back. Buffalo has some good young talent, and they're going to get better. Obviously, acquiring Peyton Krebs, Alex Tuch in that Jack Eichel trade. Tuch's a really, really good player, and once he's healthy, it's going to be a stronger team. Do I think they'll make the playoffs? No. But you're still going to see him, I think, 1 or 2 more times this season. So, again, Buffalo is one of these teams that the Caps should be able to beat. I've talked, early in the season about, banking these points. And Buffalo is a team you need to get 2 points against because, quite frankly, you're a better team. So, good job by the Caps, getting out of there, getting another shootout win, second of the season. So, good stuff for them. For the Caps, these overtime woes, and it seems like a weird time to discuss it after that Buffalo game, coming off a win, but, that game against Chicago, obviously, it'd be different, and we'll get there. These overtime woes for the Caps, I think a lot of it comes with getting older. This 3-on-3 format is developed all around speed. Speed, puck possession, skill. The Caps are really, really good at 2 of those. They have some speedy guys on the team, but I do think there are a lot of teams out there that are faster than these Caps. At 5-on-5, you can kind of bridge that gap a little bit better. The Caps really do have some fast skaters. Eller's pretty quick. Kuzi obviously is devastatingly fast. Sprong's quick. You do have a lot of fast guys, but you have, Ovi's getting a little bit older. He's still quick, but he's lost. He's not as fast as he was. Same with Backstrom. And Backstrom really never was a fast skater to begin with. So it's I don't know if this 3-on-3 overtime really plays to the Caps' strength. I think it would behoove them to obviously end games in regulation when you can. The shootout, again, I mean, it's just hard to say. I mean, some teams have goalies who are really good in the shootout. The Caps goalies seem to be, we don't really know yet. We haven't seen him do it too much. Samsonov looks really comfortable, though. Vanacek has looked comfortable. So the shootout's just so much up in the air, though. I mean, it's just kind of anything can happen. It's a skills competition. So you have guys around the league who are really good. I mean, obviously TJ Oshie's really good. Sprong looks to be really, really good. This year is the first time I've seen him take shootouts, but he looks really confident and really comfortable doing it, so that's good news. But back to overtime. I'm rambling a little bit today. I'm getting a little long-winded. I apologize. It might continue today. We'll see. Anyway, for overtime, the Caps, that 3-on-3 format, it's just, like I said, lends itself to speed especially. I mean, the faster team is probably going to win just because you can possess the puck a little bit better. You can make, easier plays. You can just do things a little bit easier when you have that speed edge. And when you look at the teams that the Caps have gone to overtime against, I mean, the Anaheim Ducks have a ton of speed and skill. Chicago Blackhawks, ton of speed and skill. So, and Buffalo too. I mean, they're not the most, I wouldn't call them the most skilled team in the league, but they have a lot of young guys who are fast. So, for the Caps, I don't think overtime is going to be their cup of tea unless this youth movement really sticks and we start seeing, Connor McMichael, Alexei Protas really, really stick in the lineup and, putting them with a guy like a Kuznetsov, like an Eller, like an Ovechkin. I mean, these complementary pieces. Oshie's a pretty quick guy as well. And now getting Oshie back is huge. They haven't had Oshie for a lot of the season, and you kind of forget when he's not there. It's, he's not as big of a star player as maybe he was with the Blues. He's a little bit more, I wouldn't say a role player, but he certainly does, fall into, Ovi, Kuznetsov, Backstrom shadow from time to time. Having Oshie back is so huge for this team, and I haven't really talked much about it since he's been back, and I feel like it's almost a disservice. Like, I need to talk about the guy because he does so many of those great things every night. He's a skill guy, he's quick, but he does everything. I mean, he takes faceoffs, he hits, he blocks shots, he makes good plays in the D zone, great plays in the offensive zone. He's a 200-foot player. He's the kind of guy that, again, like I said, he doesn't get the recognition he probably deserves all the time, but he's such an important piece for this Caps team. So I have to touch on TJ Oshie a little bit. Had, a huge role in that Chicago game. Anyway, to get back on track here for the Caps, that was a bit of a huge segment off there. I don't usually do that anymore, but had to do it just, I guess, once in a while. But back on track here. Buffalo, getting out of there with a win is huge. You're on the second half of a back-to-back. You're looking for a win any way you can get it, and they got it. Coming into Chicago. Big news. Big news for the Caps coming in. You're going to get Trevor Van Riemsdyk back. You're going to get Nicholas Backstrom making his season debut. As the ticker will tell you, new feature here on Caps Hockey Review, we're getting a little better. We're getting a little more advanced. Anyway, Nicholas Backstrom's season debut against the Blackhawks. But seemingly for the Caps this year, every acquisition or every return comes with an exit from the lineup. And Evgeny Kuznetsov on COVID protocol. COVID seems to keep hanging around for the Caps. We had Eller, we had Dowd, Hathaway, Van Riemsdyk was on there. Now Kuz is on there. Like, they're not having these huge outbreaks. It's kind of come over a period of, weeks for the Caps that these guys are getting sick. They're not having, 6, 7, 8 guys test positive all at once like we're seeing with the Calgary Flames. And I apologize. Somebody else had games postponed. I believe it was Ottawa. That's who it was. I apologize for my little gaffe there. The Ottawa Senators as well. So for the Caps, this COVID, I mean, it's going to keep hanging around. I'm not really going to get too far into it just because, COVID's just become such a hot button issue, politically, socially, whatever you want to say. So COVID is COVID. It's going to continue to be an issue for professional sports and sports really of any level. I think for the next, at least for this season, the future, who knows? I mean, we're getting new variants, so it could be a long-term thing, and teams may just have to find a way to deal with it, and leagues are going to have to find a way to deal with it until maybe, a better vaccine or whatever, what have you, comes around, maybe a more permanent solution. So anyway, and I'll touch on it. The Olympics after COVID could have some implications for that as well, but I will get to that at the end. I want to get through Chicago first. This game, Caps get off on the right foot. Power play goal from Ovi gets them going early in that second period. That's what you need. You're on the road looking to get a winning streak going again. It's been a little bit since they've, strung together 3, 4, 5 wins in a row, and they really, really need to get back to it. So for Washington, that's what we're looking for here. Obviously, Samsonov gets the net. He's been fantastic. This game was going good right up until it wasn't for the Caps. And they played a good game. I'm not going to sit here and tear them to pieces and say it's a bad game. It's whatever you want to say. For the Caps, I apologize there. For the Caps, this is one of those moments, and the Caps have been on the right side of it for a lot of this season. These quick strike goals, right? You go, you score 2 goals in 20 seconds or, less than a minute. The Hawks, 3 goals in less than a minute. They were on a 5-on-3, score, 5-on-4, score, back to 5-on-5, they score again. I mean, this is one of those deflating moments in a game. You're in the second period, you're on the road, now you go from, in the space of less than a minute of game time, you go from being up 1-0 to down 3-1. That's such a huge swing in momentum. I mean, the Caps were controlling a lot of that game up to that point. They were doing a lot of things well. They were playing the right way. The penalty trouble has to stop. And I'll be the first to admit, last night, there were a lot of calls that went against the Caps that I felt didn't get called against the Hawks. It felt very much like the Caps were, I won't say singled out. It just seemed like they were calling a tighter game for the Caps than they were for the Blackhawks. And I know I'm a Caps fan. Some people who watch this are going to be like, oh, well, you're just biased because you're a Caps fan. Maybe, but just in watching it, I mean, we saw kind of a light tripping call against Oshie on Jonathan Toews. Then we saw right off the ensuing faceoff, Toews kind of trips up Eller, similar kind of play, and it doesn't get called. So I guess for me, I would like to see, if you're going to call a tight game, you got to call it for both teams. If you're not going to call it tight, it has to be that way for both teams. If nothing else, the NHL officials, it just needs to be consistent for both teams within a game. Calls are not going to be consistent from game to game every time. So it's simply just enforcing it equally for both teams. And maybe things get missed in a game, but the amount of penalties the Caps took, they took 6 penalties last night. They've been one of the least penalized teams in the NHL all season, and I think that's been a huge underlying key to their success. Obviously, you have the great players on the ice, and they're adapting and overcoming this adversity, and they did it again last night for a little bit, but staying out of the box. I've talked about it so much in the time that I wrote the blog, and now that I'm doing these videos, I've talked about so much. This team had so many problems with penalties over the last 2-3 years, and it had to change. It had to clean up because last year, 2 years ago, they were the most penalized team in the NHL, and it showed. You're not going to win games. You're going to lose some important games when you take that many penalties. That's obvious. Anybody in hockey can tell you that. So for Washington, the penalties have to clean up. Obviously, getting, It's inconsistent, I would say, like I talked about, from team to team. That sucks, but that's what caused that 3-goal swing. I mean, the Caps obviously were kind of caught off balance. They got back on their heels, but those penalties are a dagger. I mean, you give the opposing team, zone time. I mean, the Caps had a few chances for shorties, but it didn't work out, and the Hawks were able to capitalize on a few of those power play chances, and that makes the difference in a game. So, for the Caps, penalties have to clean up. That's just the long and the short of it for this game. Obviously, falling in overtime is a tough way to end. They had a great comeback. They get tied at 3. The Hawks come in and score again with 5 minutes left. The Caps tie it on a last 5 seconds. Tie it on a goal from Connor Sheary, a wicked pass from Ovi from below the goal line or just on the goal line. A great job by this team. I mean, I've talked all season. They've been such a resilient bunch with all the injuries, with all the things that haven't quite gone their way. In the past, this would be a team that would fold the tent and just say, it's not our night. We'll come back next game, we'll be better, but it's not happening for us tonight. They haven't done that. I mean, they've battled in every key situation this season, and they've found ways to get back in games that maybe in the past they wouldn't have, especially last night. Those 3 goals within a minute, that is an absolute deflator. I mean, there are plenty of teams in the NHL that would have folded after that. The Caps get a big goal at the end of that second period. Daniel Sprong really, this guy historically, Sprong is very, very streaky. When he's on, he is on. And it looks like he's heating up again. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward. But for the Caps, you fall in the shootout again. It's unfortunate, but getting a point. Okay, at least getting a point. You get 3 of a possible 4 out of these 2 games. Headed to Winnipeg. The challenge here. Okay, the Caps are having some guys test positive for COVID. Obviously not traveling with the team. That goes without saying. Having some issues. Canada is starting to restrict things again. COVID has popped back up, with the cold weather. Canada is, fairly newly off restrictions compared to the U.S., and they're starting to implement them again. So for the Caps, it's going to be tough getting to Winnipeg. They are not traveling to Winnipeg until Friday to minimize the amount of time they're spending across the border. Luckily for the Caps, the Canadian trips are not too many the rest of the season, so hopefully this won't continue to be a problem. But the travel issue. I said I'd circle back to this. The Olympics. I am very excited for this Olympic tournament if the NHL players are there. It seems like they will be. And it was said at the beginning of the year. They will go. But I said a couple weeks ago, they will go as long as COVID does not drop a bomb on this season again. And we're starting to see some of the stuff we saw last season. We're starting to see some postponements. Guys out with COVID obviously are the reason for these postponements. The concern with traveling to China, all the way across the world, the COVID issue, if you test positive in China, that is going to be a long road to get back to the United States because you're going to have to quarantine, you're going to have to, stay there extra. So it's really going to kind of have to, it's on the Players Association. I think it's ultimately going to be their decision. If the NHL has to continue to postpone games, they may step in and say, okay, we can't do this. We can't afford to interrupt the NHL schedule. The NHL has to complete an 82-game season this year. And as much as I would hate to see another Olympic hockey tournament full of ex-NHLers, junior players, college players, whatever, the NHL has to complete this season in its full 82-game capacity. It just has to happen for this league. As far as revenue, as far as fan interest, this is hugely, hugely important. It has to happen this year. So the Olympics may come at the expense of that. Or this may come at the expense of the Olympics. So as much as I would hate to see it happen, the realities of COVID's popping back up again. This is a concern. It was a concern to begin with. But also when you add on top of it, the NHL is having to add more disruptions. I mean, you have an all-star game, you have the Olympic break. The NHL has to get creative with the schedule in years like this to begin with. And then adding in COVID, it's just, more delays, more, getting creative with the schedule to make up these games. On top of all of that, going to China and let's say an entire team were to test positive, that is, probably the worst case scenario. But the reality of having to quarantine and, having to quarantine for X amount of weeks before you can travel, that would potentially get players stuck in China, well past the end of the Olympics if, this worst case scenario were to play itself out. So the players really are going to have to look at this, and the NHL is going to have to look at, okay, is it safe? We've done everything we can. We've gotten players vaccinated. You can't do much else. The NHL's done everything they possibly can to minimize the risk of their players. But getting stuck in China, because the NHL schedule has to resume, regardless of who's there. If teams are missing some players because they're stuck in China, that's what's going to happen, and the players are going to have to weigh the the benefit of playing in the Olympics versus the risk of possibly missing some games with their NHL teams, and that's a huge discussion to have. I'm rambling a little bit here, I get it. It's a huge discussion to have, and I would say right now it's probably a 50-50 chance. There are those who do not believe the players are going to make it to the Olympics. There are still those who do. I would like to see it happen. I would love to see Ovi get the chance to represent Russia one more time in the Olympic capacity, as far as we know. For all these other players that haven't got the chance. I mean, there's so many great young stars in the NHL who haven't had the chance. I mean, just look at Canada. You have Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, haven't gotten the chance to go to the Olympics for Canada. You have, for the U.S., I mean, Austin Matthews, Jack Eichel, probably. He's on a pretty good pace with his recovery from his neck surgery. These are great players who I think would absolutely love the chance to play in the Olympics. And you have, some older guys who realize this is going to be their last shot, and they want another kick at the can. I mean, Patrick Kane's been part of 2 disappointing teams for the United States. You don't think he'd love to have the chance to win a gold medal and right the wrongs? Sure he would. So this is something that the NHL is going to have to address. I'm getting a bit off of the Caps for the time, but I think it's warranted. This is a huge story coming out of the NHL, and it does affect the Caps. I mean, they have Olympic hopefuls. I mean, obviously Ovi's been selected to Russia's roster already. John Carlson will most likely play for the U.S. Backstrom, we don't know yet, could play for Sweden. He might elect not to. We'll see. Kuznetsov will not play for Russia. That coming up this morning. His appeal has been denied by the IIHF. This is the final year of his suspension. He will have to serve it in its entirety, so he will not play for Russia in the Olympics. That's a huge blow for Russia. They're thin at that center position, and with the year Kuzi's had, he could certainly be a difference maker for that team. That's unfortunate for Kuz, but you do the crime, you got to do the time. He made a bad mistake, and he's atoned for it. He's served his NHL suspension, and he's come back better, I think, this year. So, but IIHF has very, very strict standards about this stuff, as they should. They're a highly respected organization, depending on where you stand on them, but they can't tolerate drug use, and they're known, any international sports committee is known for these harsh punishments. It sucks for Kuz, it sucks for Russia, but it's what it is. So, for the Capitals, what are we looking forward to? Well, what's coming next for the Caps? Obviously, heading to Winnipeg. Hopefully, the travel arrangements are sketchy right now, but they will play the Jets on Friday night, and then they'll return home for a game against the LA Kings on Sunday. So, looking for 2 more wins. I say it every time. We're looking for 2 more wins. We're looking for them to string a couple together. It's been a lot of, win-loss these last few games. So it'd be really nice to see this team get back on track and get back to where they need to be. Moving forward, Kuznetsov obviously will miss at least one more game with this COVID issue. Hopefully they'll have him back for Monday, but we'll have to wait and see. It really is a tough stitch for the Caps right now. I mean, you've had changes all year to your lineup. It's been injuries, it's been illness, obviously. Alex Ovechkin. I got to touch on this before I sign off here. Alex Ovechkin. I have to keep talking about him because, again, the man is 36 years old. He is currently leading the NHL point race at 42. He is ahead of Connor McDavid. He is ahead of Leon Draisaitl. He is ahead of Austin Matthews. This guy is timeless. And to get back to John Scott's comments at the beginning of the season, Ovi's done. Ovi's done. He comes out and he is leading the NHL in points after 27, 28 games. This is fantastic for the Caps. I mean, obviously, it's great for Ovi. He's doing these things. He's recaptured his youth a little bit. Is it going to continue the rest of the season? We sure hope so. Because if you look at the lineup rotations they've had to make due to injury, illness, all this other shit they've been dealing with, the big constant for them has been Ovechkin in that forward lineup. I think every other forward, maybe except Carl Hagelin, has missed at least a game. Dowd has missed games. Hathaway's missed games. Eller, Sprong, McMichael, Backstrom, Wilson, Oshie, Sheary. Everybody else has missed games. Ovi has been the one player that has played every game in that forward role. So, these Caps have to keep it going. This is a tough Metro division. The Rangers are really hot. The Carolina Hurricanes are staying hot. This team has to stay competitive. I'm not concerned about their ability to stay competitive at this point. I would like to see this lineup get healthy, though. I've talked about it every single time I'm with you because I have to. Because every time I'm with you, they are missing some significant piece of their lineup. I mean, defense is finally back intact, and offense, I mean, Wilson's no contact, but he's practicing, so maybe we'll see him for Monday. Certainly not going to see him in Winnipeg in all likelihood. We won't see Kuz yet. Got to keep waiting. Got to keep waiting for everybody to get healthy. We haven't seen Hathaway for a while, so this Caps group, they fought adversity all year, and it's going to continue at least for another probably couple weeks until everybody can get healthy. Let's hope we can get maybe finally a consistent lineup after Christmas. It's coming up right here around the corner. But I will be back with you after that LA game. We'll break it all down. Look ahead after that. Great things so far this season from the Caps. I would say they've overachieved as a team. We'll do a little halfway through the season review around January. And I'm really, really excited for this team at this point. You know, they've been a little more up and down of late, but the changes continue. And all things considered, they've had a ton of success with all the injuries, the illnesses, all the adversity. It's been great by this team. They've answered every question in a very positive fashion. And they've proven they're up to the challenge. Let's see if they can sustain it long term and maybe get, to a deep playoff run. We'll have to wait and see, obviously, but I'm very excited for this team and to see what happens, moving forward. I don't think this team is a fluke. I mean, you can attribute, a good first 5 or 10 games maybe to some luck, but we're over a quarter of the way through the season now, almost pulling up on a third of the way through the season. So really good things by this team. Looking for them to stay hot as we move through the rest of the season, but 2 more games coming up here. I will be back with you after the LA game to discuss, to break down, to look ahead, all these great things. Until next time, my friends, go Caps.